friends. Welcome to episode 211 of Storyteller Conclave. This is a show all about helping you run the best tabletop role-playing game that you can, whether you're a new storyteller or dungeon master learning the craft, or an experienced storyteller looking to take your game to the next level. I'm Sarah.
I'm Rob.
How we doing, Rob?
Well, if I had plugged my mouse in, I'd be a little more prepared, but I wasn't, so...
You know.
Things happen. We can engineer around them, I suppose.
That's what we get for not having a sound engineer anymore and having to double up on duties.
You know, it's not that bad. I still think I'm going to get one of those boards.
Yeah, a little soundboard here, put over here by the mics.
No, now I'm trying to think of the name of it, and I've actually completely lost it. Like
Mixer?
the 6-button, app buttons that you can get.
Oh, Launchpad?
Launchpad.
No,
not
not
a
a Launchpad.
I can
Launchpads are for making
see them
awesome
in my
techno
head.
music.
They come in 6, 12, 16.
Yep.
They had a new
Stream
one.
Deck.
Stream Deck. Thank
Stream
you.
Deck.
Totally lost my brain there.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to get one of those to have everything that I need right on it.
Mm-hmm.
Because I 6 or 8 buttons is pretty much all I would ever need.
Yeah.
But I it just hasn't been needed. Really, it's not that heavy of a requirement, but it's within the list. So.
Well, Yule's coming up, so...
That is true. Beyond that, we had the first game session of Nova
Praxis, yeah.
which is Heatsink's game, which is a derivative of Savage World engine, and I thought it went really well.
I thought it went really well too.
Yeah.
I mean, there was your obvious first session jitters and stuff like that, but nothing that was unexpected in any way of first session rockiness and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I really think I told Sean on the way home from game. I said we had played some Dungeons and Dragons before. He had tried to run not only Princes of the Apocalypse, but he had tried to run Waterdeep Dragon Heist.
Yes,
and it was very clear to me, having seen him DM those and then storytell here in Nova Praxis, that Nova Praxis was a whole new game for him. Those other D&D games were very much not his element, and his storytelling for his Nova Praxis game was phenomenal.
Yeah,
absolutely top notch.
And it was there's a certain joy to sitting there watching someone get comfortable with it and watch the table get comfortable with it. It was really cool. We had a player who really hasn't had a chance to roleplay in a very long time.
Yeah.
And she had a great time with a great character, fell into her character as well as he falls into his character in your game.
Yes.
And I use the term fall into in both kind of the way some people can naturally elicit who they are into their character. And both of them pretty much did the same thing, where from the moment that they started, they're they recognized what they needed to do to be their character and kind of just pushed that one button. The one thing that most of us can't do, which is, I only know one trick, this is the one I'm pushing to be my persona. And realistically, that works exceptionally well in role-playing.
Yeah, it does.
And then you can wrap everything else around that and become more of a whole. Whereas instead, we're all trying to do all these crafty things to be a unique character.
Right.
When it's just dude, you're dopey. Be dopey all the time. Just try and be dopey all the time. So, which is funny, because I'm trying to do that for my characters. I'm trying to pull myself, trying to pull Rob back from leadership by being a jerk.
Yeah.
And I'm I'm just going to be a jerk. I just a little jerky. I'm not a complete turd. I'm going to get the job done.
Not like a PvP jerk, but
no. But
I'll do it, but I'm going to bitch about it the whole time.
The whole time. And I'm going to throw little comments at people. I keep calling the one person in our group who's still bio. They're not chipped and sleeved. A meat bag, and a hamburger. I'm not throwing nasty comments at it, but they're all joyful pokes. I'm still working with him. That's not ending. So yeah, it's fun. It's different to push those angles, and I highly recommend it, especially if you're a storyteller. You get exhausted from playing hundreds of characters as NPCs and trying to remember stuff. It's good to just do one thing.
Yeah.
Just back off and be one thing.
Yeah, it really is.
And enjoy it.
That was one thing that Sean was saying, was that he really wanted to get a game to play with you and I in it.
Yeah.
And so he's finally got his wish on that. The only other wish he has is he wants to play alongside me under another storyteller.
Yeah.
We actually haven't had the chance to do that because we storytell for each other.
Oh, yeah, totally. Yeah. Which is funny because, like, everything that I'm doing, I'm trying to keep myself from writing things or getting ideas, and all I'm doing is writing ideas and then pushing them off to the side. And I keep getting a more rounded view of what I would like to do in the future. And I'm just like, I like that. I'll keep that over there. And it's like, hey, Rob, you're a storyteller. Get back over here.
Yeah.
It's trying to, like, seduce me into it again, so. But I'm trying to take my time.
Right on.
So, speaking of storytelling.
So we have the first episode of a 3-part kind of miniseries. We do this occasionally, where we see that we've got similar topics that are near each other, so we'll lump them all into the same month.
Or we'll think of, like, as we're coming up with a topic, we'll be like, that really should be 2 topics. This is going to be real long if we keep this going. So,
exactly. So we did that in our scheduling session that we had not long ago, and we came up with a bunch of episodes that we're going to have about combat. This being the first one, and the topic of which is combat without combat.
Yeah,
and that sounds a little contradictory.
Well, I mean, it is in the sense that, like, when we, at the inception of tabletop gaming, if you watch the peak and rise into role-playing, it was fantasy miniatures.
Yeah.
Right? Whether you go as far back as the actual tactical, like, historical battling on tabletop.
A lot of those, like, play-by-mail, African Assault World War II, sort of things.
You know, or you step into, like, chainmail and some of those where there was no real role play in it. Yes, you were playing a role, but you were effectively just moving a mini. Yeah. Instead of going from large scale to squad to very small scale. It was role playing at its inception, and because of that, it was war game and strategy with a flavor wrapped on top of it.
Yeah. Role-playing was almost kind of tacked on afterwards, kind of like, as it evolved into a role-playing game, as, like, Chainmail evolved into D&D, it was like, it did that because they wanted to tell stories about the heroes that they had in the Chainmail game,
Right, because they wanted to be the heroes that they saw. They wanted to be Conan, or they wanted to be Buck Rogers, or they wanted to be whatever was out there, which 100%, be Token. And instead of writing, I'm writing this story, but I also want to play as these characters. And through that, it carried those roots of combat-centric in.
Yeah.
And tried to mimic as much of it as it could through, because that was the rules that it knew. And knew how to balance and figure out.
Oh, that's not even terribly strange. Like, Savage Worlds actually started as a miniatures combat game and grew into a full role-playing game on top of that. So, I mean, it's even, modern systems are, kind of have that backstory to them.
I think there's quite a few modern systems that still do.
But you can see that in a lot, because of that, in a lot of systems where, like, the grandfathers of modern systems grew up as combat systems, as strategy war games, And so when you've kind of set this precedent in gaming that, like, combat is a major component of role-playing, having a well-fleshed out, established, detailed rules system to adjudicate combat is, you look back on your forefathers, essentially. You have forefathers. And you say, well, that's how D&D did it, and D&D is a huge major product, so we got to have an established combat system. And then the predecessors of those systems look back and say, well, they had a big combat system, and D&D had a combat system. You see how it kind of, propagates itself. And honestly, I gotta say, like, growing, for having over 25 years, role-playing game experience and stuff like that, storytelling and whatnot, it's really only nowadays that we're seeing a widespread amount of games that are making that sort of broad narrative push. And I'm not saying, like, in the last 2 or 3 years. I mean, like, in the last decade or so,
I would agree with that statement, but I think also it's part of the growth cycle. I mean, think of how long ago D&D came out.
Oh, yeah.
How much evolution and rule design that came out of that system, and then what basically the OSR break. At that point, how many years did it take before we saw... We as a collective community saw systems that are now known to the greater community. And a lot of that has to do with distribution. A lot of that has to do with the conventions changes. A lot of that has to do with just the way that the properties were distributed. I mean, Cortex is a great example. Like, we just talked about that, where literally members of the TSR team left to do other crap. They wanted to tell a different story and wanted to show that in systems. And those rules people came forward and said, we don't have to follow this example. Like, this is a framework. The D20 framework is great, don't get me wrong, but we don't have to follow it.
Yeah.
And I kind of want to make the point here, because I'm not going to say that we're going to bash D&D in this, because we're not. We're actually talking about tactical versus narrative, and that's the real key. And one of the things that you and I went back and forth just a bit about in the research of this was, like, where the break line is between when a system is tactical and when the system is narrative. What is the zero mark in the middle? That really defines that, because we talked about Savage World being on one side, Cortex being on the other.
And it's funny because when you start talking about the like dichotomy between a system like Cortex and a system like Savage World, it's funny to me because I conceive of, like, Savage Worlds as a narrative heavy tactical game, and Cortex is a, like, narrative heavy. Wait, no.
Is a mechanical heavy narrative game.
Mechanical heavy narrative game, yeah.
But it's not tactical. And
it feels, but what I'm saying though is it feels like if you take one layer of tactics out of Savage Worlds, it stumbles directly into Cortex.
I completely agree with that statement, and which put forth my question to you, or my thesis statement, which was originally that the defining line between the two of them, and this was, again, we went back and forth, and I kind of want to do that real quick, is that initiative. Once initiative hits the table, it is no longer, you're not playing in that other system, like the other side of the system. You've moved through the mirror, and now you're over here. Just by saying, roll initiative, we are done. And that doesn't exist on the other side. They don't have that.
Right.
That dichotomy is there, but you made a really interesting point about that.
I think we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves in the discussion, though. I want to build up to that point.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
But I'll leave it at this then to kind of get us stepped into the right direction.
Sure.
That calling for initiative causes pain.
Yeah, it does.
It's unseen or seen in some cases.
It does.
And why are we having this discussion? Why is this a show?
Right. Games have perfectly good sets of combat rules. Why are we talking about how to circumvent them, essentially?
And the answer is that so many people say that combat takes too damn long.
Yep.
It's the pacing, that pace break, where we're having this great narrative and everything's going great, and then the music kicks in, roll some dice, and now it's like, all right,
and that's the discussion I wanted to set up first, was that it is one of pacing, but it's also one of consequences, and I'm going to circle back around to consequences in a bit.
I think that's exceptionally important.
But yeah, I think the pacing is the big one. I mean, I think everybody who's been in the hobby for a little bit has heard that old D&D joke that, like, D&D is the only game where a 3-hour trip takes 30 seconds, but a 30-second combat takes 3 hours.
I think that's accurate.
And, I mean, it's funny, but it's also true.
Yeah.
That, like, combat does represent that much of a grinding halt to your pace that a 30-second combat can take 3 hours of gameplay to adjudicate. You think of any other action in a role-playing game that takes 3 hours to adjudicate, I'm walking away from that table,
Yeah, and to be fair, it does sit pretty far in the tactical scale, but there are other games that are equally as challenging to adjudicate through combat. Because of the fact that there are mechanics that are detailed that go into... Even Savage World takes time.
Oh, sure.
Dealing
Savage World's
cards
faster, but it's by no means speedy.
Yeah, it streamlines quite a bit of it and takes out a lot of the bulk, but, I mean, it's still a break point from narrative to action.
Exactly. So you think about, like, task resolution in games, right?
Sure.
Just think about like multiple different tasks you might do in an average game. All right.
Yeah.
So you've got things from moving at the pace of, say, real-time resolution. Okay. So most social encounters are real-time resolution. Why? Because we're talking at the speed of talking.
Yeah.
Right.
It's also, I mean, at the same time, in relative difference there, it's usually either a simple request, like a simple push, a simple action that takes care of whatever the resolution is. You're stepping up to the guard. I'm going to persuade him.
I'm going to make a simple persuasion check, or I'm going to make a simple bluff check, or something like that.
So it's near real time in most cases.
But then you've got kind of your expedited narrative pace for a lot of other things, like we mentioned, travel. You know, as the joke goes, it takes 30 seconds to make a 3-hour trip. Why? Because you say, and you hit the road, and then you show up at the Weary Traveler Inn. Yeah. Okay, boom, done. Most crafting, most shopping is
hours
just
of in-game, quote-unquote, in-game time.
Exactly. Even something like, lock-picking or searching for traps.
Right.
Okay. Now, unless you're the lock-picking lawyer and you're picking things in 3 seconds, or searching for traps, like a lot of those things where it says, like, you take 10 minutes to search the room for traps. Well, we don't take a break, and say, like, okay, everybody, get a snack, go to the bathroom, whatever. It's going to be 10 minutes until we're done searching, so go take a walk,
Right.
No, we say make a search roll, boom, here's what you find, or here's what you don't find.
Right.
And we're done. It's faster than real pace, But then you get into combat, and like you said, you roll for initiative, and everything stops. Everything grinds to a halt.
Yeah.
And you've got this intricate resolution of individual minutia, right? So not only initiative, okay? I mean, initiative is the death stroke right there.
Yeah.
But that initiates the whole killing of your pace. But then you've got, okay, how many attacks are you making? How much damage are you doing? Against which specific targets are you targeting? You get to measure exact range to make sure that everybody is within your cone of cold, because you want to hit everybody with that cone of cold.
Yeah.
Et cetera, and traditional combat rules just take that story that moves at or above the pace of real time, and now, you're down to 6 seconds every 15, 20 minutes.
Well, not only that, but, like,
at most,
instead of everybody being involved within the moment, like, even if there's crafting or something else, everybody's involved in that in near real time.
Yes.
Now it's legitimately the moment the dice hits the table and that person sees their initiative number, they have just gone into standby. Their brain is no longer connected to that sequence because they're not interested.
Yeah.
And that disinterest really brings down the game. Brings down that energy level of game. Drops the game's personal serotonin reserves, if you will.
Yeah, and I mean, look, I get that, I run a game where I split the party a lot, where I will run individual scenes for people, but at least those are kind of engaging, because on a meta sense, you're still gaining information, because, your character, Theodane, might not be there, but Rob is at least hearing that, Vedran is doing something or another, and have this conversation with Lyrillith and, whatnot. So you're at least still processing it. Rob is still present in the scene.
Yes.
But, with something like combat, where, like, you've just got somebody kind of going, like, you've got an individual person going, like, all right, well, I've got this spell or this spell.
Yeah.
Which one am I going to cast? Well, this person's in range of this, but if I cast this, I won't have that. That's not fun for anybody, and it's not difficult to understand why someone would check out during that and be browsing their phone or whatever,
Exactly. And it is rare to understand that the end of combat isn't just that, the end. It comes to a close with kind of a defined result that is understood. Like, it's either you win or you lose. There isn't something in between, and in that sense, most combat systems don't allow for an in between.
Yeah, they really don't.
It is either defined one way or the other, and that right there doesn't lend well for consequences.
Yeah, it really doesn't, because there was actually a really great Reddit thread that I saw not too long ago that was really thought-provoking about this whole... it really put into words a lot of my difficulties with, like, Dungeons & Dragons.
Sure.
Specifically. But I mean, this also goes for any game that styles themselves off of the Dungeons & Dragons, heavy combat.
Yeah, not even necessarily D20. I think this would apply easily to Palladium. This would fit into GURPS. This would fit into a lot of the D20 systems. Pathfinder would equally as fit within that scope.
Yeah, sure. But the point of the thread basically was that running D&D combat is actually really difficult for the storyteller. Really super stressful for the dungeon master, because there's so much emphasis placed on balancing monsters correctly, balancing combat encounters correctly, right? So you can't have too many enemies, because then they can be one shot or AoE, area of effect, like fireball or something like that.
Crowd control.
And a lot of times, if it's a swarm of small creatures, they're too small to present any danger because of how things like to hit and armor class work. You can't have too few for the quote unquote challenge rating, because then they need to be so large that they can demolish their party on a bad die roll. How many stories have you heard of like, oh yeah, I put them up against a red dragon and I TPK'd them in one fire breath. Well, it's not a terribly uncommon thing, I want to give them a big boss monster, but then that boss monster just wipes them off the board because it's balanced for a much higher level group. You can't let them win, or that's a TPK, and nobody likes that. Right? And you can't make them lose so quick that they aren't fun to fight.
Yeah.
So essentially, every combat encounter in D&D is a carefully choreographed dance of, I'm going to put up just enough of a fight to make your pulse quicken, but not enough that you're ever in any real danger.
But and the other thing that speaks to is that a lot of storytellers want a specific outcome, want a hard outcome at the end of a combat encounter. And that's not how combat encounters work mechanically,
especially with all the dice rolling that goes on in them.
Yeah.
I mean, let's not forget that the dice are a randomization mechanic.
Like I wouldn't say the ultimate, but definitely a heavily weighted one.
Yeah.
And because of that, again, it doesn't give an option, or does not present an option of consequence that push the players to other options. Like fleeing, running, hiding, taking a hostage.
Yeah.
Negotiating.
There's basically it's very much like it kind of switches you into like, okay, well, if this is a quote unquote combat scene, that's now how we get out of it, is we kill or we are killed.
Right. And somehow, like, once the swords are drawn or arrows have been thrown, or have been slung in a direction, it's everyone is here to murder.
Yeah.
And it's no longer murder. I am surviving. We're in war or something. Well, for those 30 seconds, or less.
Really interesting situation that happened in Sean's Novapraxis game, where Sean's brother James ran in and had this like monofilament blade or something like that in his arm. I don't remember exactly what it was, but found out real quick how D&D tactics don't work so well in Savage Worlds.
No.
Because he straight up sliced someone in half. And he was like, I did not expect him to go down in one hit. I'm like, he's an extra. That's all he has, is one hit. And you had a cybernetically enhanced body wielding a monofilament katana blade.
Yep.
Yeah, you cut him in half.
Yeah.
And he was like, oh, I didn't mean to, guys. I'm sorry. Okay, well, lesson learned,
And you just killed a guy who can't come back.
Yeah, but your instinct was, the point of it is the instinct was, this is a combat. Run in and try to kill.
Yeah.
And you hope you knock their hit points down a little bit, and maybe they go, oh, I'm low on hit points, I give up now, because you're expecting that attrition, but Savage Worlds doesn't have it. It's up, down, or off the table for extras, so...
Yeah, and I feel like the games that sometimes we watch don't do the honesty of what's really going on at the table mechanically. They're extrapolations of those moments of when combat just kind of dies due to conversation. And I say dies in the sense that it's no longer important. But when people are playing at your table or at a home table or wherever, you don't get those same kind of transitions, those narrative transitions.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think that's interesting. Like, in your game, I was able to force it.
Mm-hmm.
When we came upon the bandit camp, and Thalion decided that he was going to do a show of force at a entrenched encampment with weapons drawn.
Yep.
And we were just like, nope, this is not a combat. This is not a combat.
The
He's
funny
an idiot.
thing was that those weapons were drawn specifically for him because they saw what he did in the last combat they had with him, and the guards were given specific instructions. If that asshole right there tries and
opens his
that
mouth.
one,
Yeah, in particular,
the Ponzi-looking one,
right.
does anything, shoot him.
Yeah.
I don't really so much care about the others. They seem cool, but that guy
right there.
and the first thing he does is a show of force. It's like, okay, well, you take 2 crossbow bolts to the chest. Yeah. And I love how you guys jumped on him immediately. We're like, whoa! Whoa! He didn't mean it. We got him tackled. He's...
I'll cuff him myself.
I will cuff him myself. We will knock his ass out, and we will talk about this, but we will talk about this.
Exactly. And it's things like that that don't normally happen when you're walking up to a camp. That's not something that usually comes together.
Yeah, usually it's like, okay, there are bandits, roll initiative.
Well, we have to plan. We have to tactically advance on this place, and handle it in a different way.
I'll come in from the north, you come in from the south, I'm going to cast Fog Cloud, and you guys,
So this could all be done in 3 hours when we're done with this combat,
Right.
So when you then start removing things from those options list to just kill or be killed, as Overwatch put in the Game of Thrones design, as it comes to it, it really does stop things. Yeah. It stops the feeling. I think the question comes into play is, can you, with your table, will your players accept it? That step away from physical mechanical combat. I had to do it in my D&D game.
Yeah.
There was no way I was going to fill up all of our time with just doing combat after combat after combat, even though all of you were combat monsters. And I think that depends on the group. I think we did really well with that. I think every time I made an adjustment, you guys were exceptionally forgiving.
Sure. I mean, I think the answer to that question is extraordinarily table dependent. I mean, you and I have... I say lucked out because our personal preference is narrative heavy. Okay.
Yeah.
And understand that when I say we lucked out that we have narrative heavy players, understand that it's not a judgment call on anybody else's table.
No, not at all.
But we prefer narrative, and we got a bunch of narrative heavy players, so we lucked out personally with our own lots.
Yeah, and our players understand that we are narrative people.
Yeah, and they too are, are narrative heavy. When you said, "Hey guys, I kind of don't want to do combat." Yeah. Like tactical combat turn by turn for the ending of my D&D game, every one of your players went, "Yeah, no, let's not do that. We have no allegiance to it. Let's bail." And same for me when I said, "Guys, I'm thinking about switching over to Savage Worlds. It's got the benefits of it are a lot more narrative possibilities. Blah 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 blah." I've said all this on the air before. All of my players went, "That actually sounds great. Let's make that move." And you all leaned into it really heavy, and that was great.
Yeah.
But your table may be different. But the question you really kind of need to ask is, how important is it that you do the intricate resolution of combat? The question we're really trying to ask with this is, are you getting anything more out of finding out just how well that arrow hit the guard, or just how many of the zombies got caught in your fireball?
Yeah. I mean, I go back to the 7th Sea example, first edition. Dueling is a big thing.
Yeah.
There are all kinds of neat techniques and maneuvers and ways that you can mess with your opponent and tag them and mark them and cut them down or defend against them in unique ways, and all of that is crafty and cool. But it's flashy for 2 people, maybe 3 if you've got like a kind of weird Zorro thing going on. But it again still eats a lot of time, but it does lend to a specific type of character. It spotlights a character for a period of time. And if it's necessary and you can do it, like having the swordsman fight the sword bad guy, the Inigo Montoya of your group, getting his
absolutely.
revenge. I think those kinds of moments are beautiful for that. But at the same time, that person's dedicated a lot of points to that.
Yeah, and that's the other really tricky part of the equation is, we've got all these shiny combat abilities on our sheets. We kind of want to use them,
I never get to use these things.
Exactly. I mean, I myself, but part of how this whole kind of episode came together is that I myself have been struggling with this concept of, do I want to destroy the pacing of my game by actually using, turn-based combat in situations? Because the last couple times I've done it, it just, I don't know that it's had the payoff I wanted it to, It was good. Everybody enjoyed the miniatures and stuff like that, but like, I feel like maybe it wasn't as great as it could have been. And that's just a general vibe at the table. I don't think anybody had a problem with it. I don't think it was ever a negative, but I think it was at best a strong neutral.
Yeah.
You
Like, would you have been better off taking photos of your mini set up in a really epic way and using those as splash images as we discussed the opening of the combat?
Yeah, maybe.
And I often wondered about that with most of my game. But at the same time, like, I have specific individualized abilities that are designed to be used in a tactical sense.
Yeah.
How do I feel like a complete character if I can't do those things?
And honestly, you're not the only one. I mean, look at Rhaegar, look at Karoo. I mean, they're both they're the combat monsters of the group.
Right.
If I start doing things cinematically, there's like a combined 5 or 6 edges that just go out the window.
And not only that, it's just like the consequences now have a different weight. My ability to heal and keep people up and battle cry to them so that they're all buffed and things changes.
Yeah.
Drastically.
Yeah, it does.
Now, granted, I already can see in my head how that can be adjusted within terms of the game and mechanics within Savage Worlds, because Savage Worlds does handle combat very differently. But I could easily see this happen, like, looking back to D&D or some of the other games where, like, cleric's kind of useless at that point.
Yeah.
And it's...
Honestly,
that's a weight that you have to be concerned about.
Just about most classes in D&D become useless if you're not running them in combat, because like 98% of the combat abilities or the abilities in your classes are combat based.
Yeah. So, well, I want to step away from that mechanical error, because if you can get beyond that, if your players can accept the fact that not every combat is going to be crunchy, numbery, everything.
Right.
But you still want to have combat little c.
Right.
In your game.
What do you do?
What does it feel? What's important, even?
Yeah, exactly.
Like, how do you still keep the importance of the scene without making it hyper detailed and every roll mattering?
All right, Mr. Smarty Pants Storyteller, you tell us. How do you?
So, can I say years ago? Years ago, we had a show.
But we're post-pandemic, man. Time
is
irrelevant
we've
now.
talked about this twice in shows. And if you feel like you want to go back and catch those, there's nothing wrong with that. In episode 74, we talked about combat encounter design.
Yeah, it was called Encounter Design: Combat Encounters.
And we did do a show 135, which was storytelling without combat.
Yes. In case whatever you're looking at doesn't have the numbers on them.
Right. But the whole point of this was to say that one of our I will say community at large content creators, Guy Sklanders of How to Be a Great GM, really pointed out, and I like this design. I like the idea of defining what you're stepping into as a storyteller. And what it is, and this is kind of regardless, whatever the encounter is, there are 3 things you have to remember as a storyteller to make it mean anything. And that is, there have to be stakes, there has to be options, and there has to be triggers. And these are telegraphed to your players. These are the truths that must be telegraphed.
Okay.
Okay? So in the case of stakes, the idea is that it should not always just be life or death. There's a bunch of thugs. You're standing here. Now, that is a thing. Like, sometimes the ogres come out of the hills to kill the people.
Sure.
And it's pretty much simple as that. But the idea is is everybody in on the whole death thing? Like, to the death? Or maybe some people are just to the price. Or maybe some people are just to the price that they were paid, and that's too much.
Yeah.
I'm invested a little too far. This isn't worth it. How many times have we seen in movies where the guy's like, you know what, you're right. It wasn't worth the money. I'm out.
There's that. It was Iron Man 2, I want to say.
Yeah.
It was that great scene where he like drops one guard and the other guy was like, you know what? He's crazy and he didn't even pay me enough.
Yeah, exactly. The other one that gets me is the Firefly scene where you've got this big oaf who's basically just like he's going to hunt you to the end of time, screw you, and he just
kicks him into the jet intake.
And then goes immediately to the next guy who's just like, yep, best idea for everybody. I'll take the money and go. Have a nice day. Like, right to the I want to go home tonight,
yep.
kind of a mentality. And I love that. Under options, what we're talking about is that, and we think about this as storytellers, we don't often telegraph the options. Some games explicitly make sure that you telegraph those options to your players. But this is where you're helping the players by knowing that they can maybe talk their way through it. Maybe they could pay. Maybe they could work their way through the situation or around the situation, besides doing a direct attack, that there's more than direct combat. Maybe you could ambush in a way that catches them, and now you can have a conversation with the ones that are left over while some are hanging in a tree, all of Star Wars, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And the idea is that those options sometimes, I would say most of the time, needs to be telegraphed to the players because not everybody is fast on their feet for thinking of ideas of what to do.
Yeah.
So having some, and I say try to keep it to 3 so that they don't get overwhelmed. And they may come up with something completely different. Most of the time they will. But having those out there helps your players know that you're prepared as well.
Well, not only that, but like some people don't. As kind of I said, earlier, like when you roll initiative, people go into this like, oh, okay, it's kill or be killed mode. Now, so by starting that conversation with, okay, you've got some options. You could do this, you could do this, you could do this, or if you guys come up with something else, cool, let's entertain it.
Yeah.
You have started the conversation by saying it's not kill or be killed. There is cards on the table, and we could play this a bunch of different ways.
Yeah. And the last one, which I think is one of the most beautiful things that have come out in narrative storytelling, is the idea of triggers. And that those triggers are well telegraphed. We see it in movies more than anything else, where you've got, like, the bad guys are at one end of the town, and they're getting themselves ready to leave town, right? And the town people know that they're there. And when you see the sheriff and, like, sub-deputies riding back in from the ranch where they got the information they needed to basically know that it was these guys, doors start closing, people start bringing their kids inside, You
see the open sign flip from open to close.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like, maybe he pulls the drunk in, he doesn't care, but, like, he's going to bring him in because he doesn't deserve to die either.
Yeah.
And, like, those are the triggers that show something's going down. And that it's a dangerous thing going down. There's nothing to say that you can't have, like, when you walk into a room, the dead silence. And in that trigger that you're telegraphing, you can see the people reaching for their pistols, and things like that. And the draw is going to happen. So that everybody is waiting. That anticipation moment is there. That moment before initiative.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
To be able to say, what do you guys want to do? Right? And now you've got that. That it's going to be combat. How are you going to manage this? Is it going to be managed with a big C or a little c? Or not at all. And so having those 3 helps you define and makes sure that you're pushing that to the players so that they can move through it with you.
Right. Give them that what do you want to do moment.
Yeah. So the next piece to that really comes into the challenges that they're going to be presented with and the approach vector that they're taking it from.
Right.
Again, narrative games a lot of times will telegraph this directly in what they're doing. Blades in the Dark does a great job of this when you're stepping into situations. Because you need to know how you're going to go into it. 7th Second Edition did this, and they presented those opportunities. But there's nothing to say you can't do this in any system.
Oh, absolutely.
It's just a choice of how you're pushing it out there. I
mean, when it comes down to it, combat rules in a lot of systems that have, their own separate combat chapter, that goes into initiative and all that jazz. I deride it a lot, but Savage Worlds absolutely does, 100%. You have to remember that combat is a task just like everything else.
Yeah.
And so if you can roll a single die to pick a lock, or you can roll a single die to bluff your way past guards, why can't you roll a single die to see if you can fight off a handful of goblins?
Yeah. Why can't it be a dramatic task?
Sure.
Why can't everybody add to the successes that come to a conclusion? Why can't people's successes mean other things?
Yeah.
Like, I'm a good fighter. It doesn't mean I'm only good at choppy. Right? It means I've done other things in my life. I may even have abilities that say that I can do other things in my life.
Yeah.
So there's no reason why that single roll that I do in combat and can counteract someone else's failure. Right? So that they don't have to deal with a consequence. Or maybe I take the consequence and they have the success.
Right.
Like, that's the trade-off there within those that allows for narrative movements and changes that. And I think that's also where approaches can be more successful or less successful. This is the other part that gets me, is when storytellers say, my players keep doing the same thing to avoid combat because they know that they're dice heavy in that direction. Like, they'll always stealth around things. So I constantly have to make combat encounters that they can't stealth around. Why?
Right.
They're really good at it.
Yeah.
Let them be really good at it. Go do something else.
Yeah.
Like, keep giving them a reason to stealth around it.
How do I stop my player from using the ability that they spent all of their character points building?
Exactly. Or that they helped other characters to be able to do, like, the one fighter, they constantly make him take off his armor to get around combat, and then they pull it out of the bag after they're done with that so they can go deal with whatever.
Sure.
That sounds beautiful.
Yeah.
They just saved you a buttload of time.
Yeah.
Let them. That's beautiful.
Honestly, as someone who only gets to run their game like once a month optimistically, I run maybe like 8 to 10 game sessions a year just because of scheduling conflicts, and such like that. Like, the ability to fast forward the story that much and like give you guys that much plot. Man, I look forward at what my game has in like still like the plot projection, the scaffolding that I'm working off of and stuff like that. It's going to take us another 3 years to finish this game. Like, no joke. It may take us 3 years to finish this game,
I only smile and nod my head and laugh because I've been there.
Yeah.
I've been there.
And it's just because I've got 6 players that all kind of want their own, their own things and stuff like that. And I want to give that to everybody, but I also want to tell a cohesive story at the same time. So, and cohesive stories take a bit to unfold.
Yeah.
Because you can't just be like, suddenly there's dragons. I mean, you can. Matt Mercer did it and it worked great. But, what I'm saying, you need things to set up for narrative payoff and whatnot, so things just don't seem lumped in. And
I think that's the other. I'm going to jump back to what we were just talking about. When you deal with combat, it's very hard to put opportunities in place that they can find or be part of the story. There is nothing to say that you can't add opportunities into little C combats.
Yeah, sure.
That have way more weight and flexibility. Because if they come up with something creative, like one of your players is like, okay, so we're in this room, right? Yeah, all right. Can I kick the desk across the room to slam the door shut on them? You want to stop them from coming in? Yeah. Okay. You did that really well. The desk drawers all fly open when you kick it, and littered across the floor and throughout the air now is all of the notes.
You know who did this miraculously? Sean.
Okay.
The scene. Okay, so the character
last
we were,
weekend.
the character we were talking about earlier that is like that really fell into her character.
Yes.
Um,
yes.
So she is essentially the movie star / Instagram influencer style character. She's a face of the group, right?
Yeah.
Her persuasion skill is ungodly.
Yeah.
And
That's right.
It's not because she's got a bunch of raw natural talent, but her sleeve also has like pheromone, enhancers and stuff like that just makes anybody in her presence just like melt into pudding in her hands, you know? So she is following these guys who are essentially
masquerading as the maintenance workers.
Yeah, they're bad guys they're infiltrating terrorists masquerading as the maintenance workers. And so she follows them into this maintenance area. They feel cornered and aggressed on by this. So one of them pulls out a gun and shoots at her.
Yeah, tries to shoot her.
Fortunately rolled like a 2. Missed her wide. And her response to this was, "Are you seriously trying to shoot me? Do you know who I am?"
And that's all it took.
And that's all. And she rolled like a persuasion of like 16 or something like that, which in Savage Worlds is
raises.
Massive.
Yeah.
And so Sean just goes, "Okay, fast forward like 20 minutes. You are sitting at a table with these guys. A half-empty bottle of whiskey is sitting between you. And these guys are like, yeah, I don't know. Our boss had this plan to do this, this, and this. And, we were really terribly on board with it. Sorry about the whole trying to shoot you thing. But, we just didn't know what to do about it. We seriously didn't know who you were. Hey, can we get a selfie with you?"
Yeah.
Yeah,
by the way, you'll never see us again.
He used that great success not only to defuse the combat, but to roll directly into these guys just dumping plot.
Yeah.
Just plot exposition. Why wouldn't they run at the mouth? They're sitting with a movie star.
Yeah.
They're drinking with a movie star.
Yeah, and time had passed. And we didn't need to fill in the gaps of what was said or what was done.
How did they get there? Who cares?
Who cares? What cares about is where did it end up?
Exactly.
Now, maybe the player would have wanted to add some other stuff in there, but this player didn't. This player was like, sweet, that's exactly what I wanted out of it.
Yep.
And it's wonderful to see those kinds of moments be able to come through.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't get that with Big C.
Yeah.
You get that with just an encounter.
Yeah.
And that's where success can lead to opportunities, can lead to something more than just I killed more of them than they got of us.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly steps us away from the constant problem of murder hoboing.
Yeah, it really does.
And are we the baddies?
Yeah.
And I like that. I like that in games. I like that in taking combat from Big C to Little C to just encounters.
Yeah.
Because there's no reason why they have to be different.
Mm-hmm.
Now, again, we're not discounting tables where people like OSR combat. We're not discounting tables where dueling or you have players who really want to show off their magical or physical prowesses. Have those moments. Have a scene that's important.
Or people like Sean and I who are like, we found some really cool minis on myminifactory.com, printed them out, and now you all have to look at them.
I think they were all beautiful and wonderful. I love the ships. All of that was great stage makeup.
Yeah.
You know, and it was thick and it was beautiful and it made us all smile and feel engaged.
Mm-hmm.
I love all of that.
Yes.
But at the same time, combat was fun.
Yeah.
The situations were great because they were encounters, not combat.
Mm-hmm.
And that was some of the best part about it.
Yeah.
So,
you want to get to questions?
Sure, because I think they fold right in easily.
Alrighty. So, Technolich, welcome back, Technolich.
Yeah.
Asks us, combat is often seen as a special case form of conflict resolution. Why is it frequently treated differently than other forms of contested / conflict resolution by the gaming systems? Well, like I said, I think the answer here is twofold.
Mm-hmm.
We discussed earlier about how everything kind of has its roots in war games.
Mm-hmm.
And from there, the first iterations, Dungeons & Dragons, was essentially a role-playing war game, and then you moved forward from there. Everybody looks back at their forefathers and says, oh, well, they did heavy combat, so we have to do heavy combat. That's how you do a role-playing game.
Yeah, and I think the other side of it is that a lot of people look at role-playing games as an extension of video games now in many ways, because they've had them.
Yeah.
When they look at things like World of Warcraft, and as an older game, or they're seeing newer games that are doing the same types of things, they want to do the cool thing they did in the game.
Yeah.
I want to be the monster hunter who hunted the monster and did these cool moves.
Oh, God, I do, yeah.
And in that's respectable. I get it. I 100% get it. But at the same time, it doesn't always translate as well as you think. From the board, or from digital to the board, There's
also, I think, a pretty heavy component of it's ironic. You actually achieve the exact opposite effect by getting more granular with your judgment calls and narrations and adjudications and stuff like that. But I think initially the idea is you want that sort of granular storytelling to simulate the sort of fast-paced and exciting environment that combat can be. There's a lot of chaotic elements, it's a game of inches, if you hit or miss with that single arrow or that single, pulse rifle shot or something like that, could make or break the success of your team. And everybody kind of craves that, essential, I made the play of the game sort of thing.
Yeah.
But ironically, in trying to make things fast-paced and exciting by using all these rules to adjudicate the minutia of combat, you slow it down to a crawl and actually make it boring instead of exciting, Well, for a lot of people. I'm sure there are a lot of people who enjoy it, but...
People like sports for the same reason.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
There are a lot of people who don't understand why people like baseball,
It is a team sport, and that is kind of what some of the tactical combat feels like. And I respect it.
Sure.
I understand it. Go for it.
Absolutely.
But it does not make it narrative. Nevin has some questions that I'll throw in here as well, because there's something I want to kind of get to at the end of this that kind of popped into my head too.
Yeah, sure.
So, how to avoid getting bored with too long combat sequences. We're going to get to that. We have two more of these. I think you'll...
Is that still like a segue into next
it's kind
next
of
episode?
A segue into it, because the next... well, I'll explain it in a second, but what makes combat meaningful for the players? That is a hard question to answer.
This is where we start talking a lot about what you were saying earlier about stakes.
Correct.
I
think stakes being defined is one thing, but I also think that to make combat meaningful, it has to have both consequences and opportunities and a notable outcome.
You stand to gain something or lose something, depending on how the combat goes. If you lose, you will be disadvantaged. If you win, you will be advantaged.
Right. And if you win well, you may be given opportunities. Nothing to say that some of those other pieces aren't in there, but I think combat is only meaningful when you know the stakes and you know what the consequences and opportunities are.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, do you need combat in a game? Again, we'll get to that.
Do you need combat? Yeah, I mean, we can give a quick answer. I mean, there's definitely we can get to that. But the short answer is no.
The very short answer is no. Even in a game where combat is wrapped around the players, you do not need it.
Correct. I mean, there are whole games like Kids on Bikes where, the whole point is you're kids. Are you really going to fight the big bad evil monster? No, you're not. You might trap it. You might sick the authorities on it. You might, come up with interesting, Bic lighter and aerosol spray can solutions to dealing with it. But I don't think you ever really have combat in that game.
So before I bring up the next topic, something hit my mind, and I think it lends directly to it.
That had to hurt.
It kind of did. We know that VTTs are a big thing.
Sure.
A lot of VTTs are literally just an overlay of digital minis on digital terrain with some effects. Sometimes they have the rules built into them, so it helps with rolls and things like that.
Yeah, sure.
But as far as the effect of making a roll, it is not crunched and calculated like a video game, right? There's still the point of doing things on the table. D&D 1, the VTT that they're working on, keeps kind of pointing to me in the direction, and again, I could be very wrong with this, that it is going to help you with those mechanics. To the point that, like, if your players come into a scene where there are enemies that are hostile, or they open with a hostile act, that it will auto-roll initiative, and you'll be able to select what your character does, and then those effects will go off, and, and the DM will do their things, and it'll basically be turn-based combat. There's a couple questions that come out of that. Like, how do you break from that?
Yeah.
When do the NPCs get scared? When do the players get scared or know to get scared? Is there a button for flee?
Yeah.
Does everybody get to flee? Do they flee at once? Do they flee together? It opens a lot of other things that video games have to deal with, right?
Yeah.
That is often a problem. There is rarely a point, unless it is scripted into the combat, where the bad guy goes, whoa, 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 you got me, right? It's usually when their hit points are 0.
Yep.
And they're laughing maniacally as they're falling off the balcony with, like, the kid that they've got captured. And you're like, no! And now you have a revenge story, or something stupid.
Sean!
Exactly. But the whole point behind it is that as we move closer to digital platforms with this, combat becomes different. It becomes more mechanical.
Yeah.
To the point that you no longer, as a storyteller or even as a player, have a way to break from it without it becoming painfully part of breaking the system, the mechanics.
I mean, there's already stuff I was seeing, like there was add-ons for Foundry VTT. When kind of like in the thick of the pandemic, when we weren't meeting in person, that I was seeing. That was like, oh yeah, here it's an automated shopkeeper, and like your characters can just like click on it to interact, and then like you can set it up with like gear and prices. I'm like, this is a video game.
Yeah.
I'm like, why would you ever need something like this? And I mean, Sean was like, this is a great idea. It's like, so I don't ever have to bug the storyteller with shopping, and I'm like, I know, but that should be a scene though, like your storyteller should be checking off on things like that rather than just like.
Likewise, you kind of need to know that as a group, that you went and upgraded your armor.
Yeah, exactly.
And spent all the money on that. Like, there's a lot going on in the story there that's important.
Yeah.
And I get it. I understand where that mentality is coming from, and it feels like it's a quality of life thing. But it's only a quality of life thing because it's turning tabletop games into digital games that are now becoming digital games.
It's this reciprocal cycle of like video games looking at it's the two Spider-Mans pointing at each other.
Yes.
Where you've got video games going like, man, I wish I were more like the tabletop role-playing games. The tabletop games going, man, I wish I were more like that cool video game.
Yeah. And it's, I think there's an apex there that's maybe not as healthy.
Yeah.
Yeah. But Overwatch, I'm gonna end with Overwatch's statement.
I was just gonna quote this because this is great.
I think this is great. Thank you, Overwatch. So in our Discord, the live show chat, Overwatch says, action movies are cool when they have a dramatic high energy fight sequence with a cool slow-mo moment in there for added effect. Overly complex game combat can sometimes feel like the whole fight is done in slow-mo.
Yep.
And I think that's a great way of saying why we even had this episode.
Yeah.
Is that you need to have that grand feel of a scene, a dramatic scene, and then a bit of slow-mo.
Right.
That can be described. And realistically, your players should be doing that description and enjoying the moment so they can talk about it.
I remember a great moment. This happened in my game when the first time the whole group in Skingrad went to go meet with the Thieves Guild.
Yeah.
And so this ragtag band of adventurers with like 1.5 people who understand underworld contacts, and your only count as the half person because you'd been there once before.
I knew the people I was dealing with.
You met the people you were dealing with.
Yeah.
And everybody kind of had this cool, like, you don't actually have the upper hand in your own base moment that they did, where, you know, Rhaegar just struck an intimidating pose, and he made a roll, and, like, Lyrlith, like, fades into the shadows and, like, disappears.
Just gone.
Karoo does, like, a backflip and lands on the second-story balcony.
Where all the archers were.
And just looks at the archers like, go ahead, I dare you try it.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, you'll be dead before you knock the first arrow.
And these were, like, just 3 quick rolls with just that took just as long as me narrating them like that, you know? And then we had our slow-mo moment, which was Lord Thalian Arroway, our resident asshole noble, walks up to the biggest guy in the room because he has the arrogant...
Goes to pass him, actually.
Did you go to pass him, or did you walk up to him?
No, he was walking up to the main dude, and the guy stepped up to put his hand in.
He was going to approach the Thieves Guild leader, yeah.
And the thug.
And the thug, the gorilla, steps in front of him and puts a hand on him. And I was like, okay, draw a card. This is literally one quick turn of initiative, and you and I are the only people involved in it. Draw a card. And he drew higher than me, and I said, okay. You have the upper hand. You will act before him. What do you want to do to him? And he cast a confusion spell, grabbed his hand off of his chest, twisted it, put a spell on him, and put him on the ground. And went, don't you dare touch me.
Yeah.
And just didn't even break stride, continued to walk up to the guild leader.
Yeah, grabbed a chair, set it down, and put his feet up on the table.
Didn't have to turn into combat, but we had our slow-mo moment of, okay, this one could go either way. Okay, it went your way. Let's continue.
Yeah, it was such a wonderful scene to deploy, and everybody felt it.
Exactly. Now, could we have had some combat there? You had to fight your way through the guards. Sure, I'm sure we could have, but would that have been fun for everybody?
No.
Or could you just flex on them? And then that was the point of it. You flexed, we're done.
Yep.
We get it. You're powerful.
Yep.
You know?
Yep. And that is where this miniseries starts.
Yep.
Is analyzing combat differently. So our next episode is when to end combat.
Yes.
as Nevim asked.
How do you stop long combats from getting boring? Well, you end them.
Yeah, you end them before everyone is dead.
Yeah.
And that might not even be the point of it. Sometimes the point is the combat is long since over, even if especially when everything left is just like bugs.
Everything's
squishing things with a thumb, kind of a thing. You're like, yeah, you guys still have plenty of spells. There's tons of resources.
In the first 3 rounds of combat, you have killed 90% of their forces and taken a combined 4 hit points of damage. You're not losing this fight. We don't need to go another 3 turns for you to hunt the last ones down. Yeah. So, with that said, you can find us on Twitter at @ST_Conclave, on Instagram at @ST_Conclave. Listen to us live every Wednesday night at 7 p.m. Eastern Time on mixlr.com/storyteller-conclave. And join us on our Discord. We'd love to hear some questions from you. We will field them here on the air, and also talk about your game, bounce some campaign ideas off the other great storytellers that are up there. Always some great discussion going on the Discord. You can find that link on our Twitter as well as our website storytellerconclave.com.
Yeah, we've actually had a lot of lively conversation on our Discord, and I love to see it.
I
love seeing people talking about systems, mechanics, their stories. Please come join us. We'd like to thank our Patreon members who help us out every month. Especially our name members, Knox in the Box, Subjet, Sam, The Arcane Asylum, Sparkle Motion, Veteran, Hulavu, and Sean. We really appreciate all your support. Our pre-show music is by Arcane Anthems. You can find them at Arcane Anthems on Patreon or on Instagram. And our intro music is Beyond the Warriors by Geefrog. You can find that at geekfrog.bandcamp.com or on Google Music. And our outro music, which you're hearing right now, is Only Our Footprints in the Sand by Mater Machine. You can find them at freemusicarchive.org.
And a big shout out, as always, to our families, Vicky and Sean. Thank you so much for loving and supporting us. All of our friends who've sat at our tables over the years who give these great stories to share with you. And you, every single one of our listeners. We love you guys so much.
Love you.
Good night.
Good night.